Okay, as part of the introduction to questioning, which currently there's a hiccup because the Google Docs won't open it. But I think the file is fine. I'd have to just do some extra housekeeping. Um, let's use this as an occasion to sort of do one of these things where we kind of say, from where would it be possible to, as it were, to judge whether this type of thing were actually plausible or not plausible. So we have a question. We have a question of what Heidegger is calling the first beginning as against the other beginning. Erste versus andere. And it's sort of like, is this actually at all a serious conception? Let's just call it a concept. So a lot of times Heidegger does sort of say something like, here's what I mean by a proper philosophic begriff or concept. For Hegel, that has, very special meaning in his thinking, but sometimes Heidegger sort of thematizes what it means to have a philosophic concept, but then since Heidegger is not doing philosophy, we're not immediately quite sure what to take from that, except that if we follow his instructions on how to understand a concept, then we could conceptualize a certain issue, such as the first beginning as against the other beginning. But in conceptualizing it, we wouldn't be doing what Heidegger was doing. We'd only sort of, within our overall questioning, do some conceptual thinking, but on the understanding that there's a proof in Heidegger of why we shouldn't stick with the mere concept. So then that would have, and then we could get that in Strauss too. That would have something to do with saying that the concept arose historically because first Plato was talking about ideas, but then all kinds of things happened, and then at length we got the talk of the concept rather than the talk of the idea. And then you need a seminar course. Nonetheless, we could say in a certain way, even though we're dealing with something that ultimately couldn't be upheld, which is sort of a certain picture of a concept of, sort of concept could mean just a generalization somehow, but it could also mean that we sort of flesh it out in some way. A certain picture of a concept of first beginning and other beginning, in order to ask the question whether it's at all like a serious issue or something that could, or whether one could do something with it. Some people will watch that guy Rupert Spira, I think his name is, who thematizes that there's sort of a region that has nothing to do with chronological time. It's like if you think of the past and then like, when was that happening? And he wants us to conclude that in a certain way, just as like, sometimes I think of this in terms of the specific type of perception Dasein has, which however is different from Dasein to Dasein. Is like when you're, like I had occasion to be on Mount Diablo, and it's like this is one of the places in the world where you could see the furthest distances. And but just like here, it's like in a way there's only a specific amount of stuff you could see no matter where you are. So it's as though we were always in the same mode of perception. spider's eye is always spider's eye, so-called normal human eye, although they come in, 4 cones, 3 cones, and many other things, bad vision, good vision, is basically a normal human eye with different deviations. If like somebody had an eye like a telescopic lens, where it's like we're all the time looking at things happening at a different rate of motion, in the sense that a waterfall at a great distance seems to be falling slower, or actually is falling slower to your perception, depending on how you think about it. I think that would be not a deviation from a human eye, but sort of like a different type of eye with a different standard of healthy and unhealthy. But in a way, you could put those all in the same ground and sort of think about them all as the same ground. Just like any place where we're standing, we can kind of think of whether it's Mount Diablo, where according to a certain measure you could see more miles than anywhere else. And then you could say, when you're standing here, how far can you see? It's not even 1 mile. Maybe that's a mile up that hill up there. I don't know. And I guess I could see farther if I look up. I don't know how far it would actually be seen. But how are we to sort of take this concept? So I was sort of like trying to superimpose this type of notion that they were always in the same way to these questions of so-called first beginning or other beginning, in the sense it's like so they're translating this as inception, like that. So like I'm kind of commentating on the introduction to questioning, which has to do with GA 55 on Heraclitus, Heidegger's. So like, by the way, Heidegger himself said, like, when they were preparing his collected works, is saying, Gesamtausgabe, that what he would really like is that people were able to use these works to further questioning. So then, therefore, we have to like kind of find out through questioning what questioning is. So it's like everything I've said before. It's so far as sort of questioning, and I think especially in that, like, we take special precautions, look at special issues when we talk about a concept. How do we understand it? And in a certain way, we kick aside positivism. At the foot of positivism is sort of like Strauss like to adduce a saying that he attributes to Auguste Comte, C-O-M-T, to say the crude but judicious findings of common sense shouldn't be disregarded, something like that. And then this was to mean that, in a certain sense, something like customary sense, or alethea's doxa, or just doxa, let's say in Plato's terms, or pistis, I guess, in the divided line, these things that we just rely on, customary sense. For instance, that when you're hungry, it's sort of, I say it's common sense that you could put a stop to that by eating. So it's like, you're hungry, then you eat, you're tired, you sleep. That's like a very, in a way, primary version of common sense, or customary sense. But is it customary? I don't know. So those could be changed depending on, maybe you'd say, yeah, you're hungry, so harden yourself to hunger, get used to fasting, and then you won't be hungry. So that you would come up with different solutions to the supposed common sense, or maybe the customary sense, where you come from, it already starts with that, and then it goes in a different direction. But the point is, positivism sort of has back behind it this things that you get prior to a classroom. This is one of the main points about sort of the throwing off of positivism, which in a way pushes us towards Heidegger. I mean, if Hume is more on the side of positivist thinking because he's kind of an empiricist, a so-called empiricist, like he says that basically he says everything has to come first from seeing like some color outside, and that you can't just generate in your mind. If you had just only like these greens, there's actually like a bunch of different sort of greenish yellow colors here, is that whatever we actually take in, according to Hume, at least in his first major work, and then I think he made some revisions or something which were somewhat more confused, but in his first sort of more clear work, he simply says, like, you can't fill in the gaps, like, where you have through your just from the mind, as it were, just from your imagination. You have to have the sense data, even if you kind of know, yeah, like this is a very sort of deep, there's a very deep green, and this is a light green, but you actually have to see the intermediary ones. According to Hume, you couldn't just sort of generate them, so that alongside your real memories, you'd also have these images that you'd insert. That's what he denies, and then it's, you can build up from that. So if you kind of say that's analogous also in other ways to what the examples I was just giving about, as it were, sort of like prudential judgment of phronesis or something, which kind of tells you this is how you act in a certain situation. You're hungry, then you eat, or you're hungry, then you learn to harden yourself against that, because that's not the way our tribe does things, or whatever. You have a certain basis that comes in that you just grow up with, and it comes before anything. But according to Comte, even though he's aware of this quote-unquote problem, he didn't regard it as a problem, because he just thought sort of we do it that way because the environment demands it, conditions demand it, and it's healthy, and it's tried and true. But that's been challenged. I think this is one of the big, like when we try to question and rethink what's become so tedious, and people don't want to mention it because it's no longer chic, is the analytic divide, the analytic continental divide. But I think that's in a way the essence of it is over, this question of whether we accept some form of positivism, which has to do with, the essence of it would be actually, you'd see it in the two substances of Descartes. So it's like one is the so-called objective substance, the extension, which can be built up from, especially geometrically. And then the other is the so-called subjective, where there's no building up because the parts could change. So I mean you notice that that's sort of it's explanatory in that you could see where, like, we're dreaming, and in the dream we come up with all the intermediary types of green, even though we only saw two greens. And then they would populate our memory, so that even our memory, because we saw them in the dream, our memory would then have all the intermediary greens. So that's the alternative in a way. And so then you notice that what we're being told is, oh, that's subjective, or that's the second Cartesian thing, the ego cogito. It's actually within itself, it has this potential for, but these things were developed by Leibniz, because Leibniz said, whatever is first in the sort of half following Hume, like whatever is in the mind was first in the senses, except the mind itself. So then we could see like the dream is modifying the mind itself and populating it with these new memories and these new tonalities and this new all those intermediary um, uh, uh, levels of hue and or chrome. Or chromatic brilliance, I think they call it. But so how does this work? Like, do we have to take a side on that claim? No, we don't have to take a side on that claim to reach the factical Dasein position, out of which we'd ask this question about whether the question of the erste Anfang, first beginning, or the andere Anfang, the other beginning, has any sense. So like one just form. So let's just not sort of be too invidious and annoy the viewer too much. I'll just like put forward one thing that's sort of like straightforward, although therefore sort of general and not distinct, which is we could pose the question, let's see, in terms of let me look at it again. First beginning and other beginning. So we could pose it in terms of saying Husserl has said there's always this double Cartesian situation, right? There's always the pre-scientific, which corresponds to what we're saying, the custom, how to thematize that is another problem. Like customary sense, common sense, but what does common sense mean? Does common sense mean whenever, right, when pundit is in favor of something, they say it's common sense, and then they entrench themselves, so there can no longer be shaken out of their tribe, and there can no longer be shown the Socratic mirror, which would force them to reflect about that maybe common sense is not so obvious what it means, because the common sense of a cannibal isn't the same as the common sense of a 21st century American. So the Husserl starts by saying, there's this pre-scientific, how does he call it, attitude, and there's a scientific attitude, and he thinks this is like everything Hegel's describing. This is when Hegel talks about the blind man has come into possession of sight, and now he's seeing the sun rising, and then we have that image ends in Spengler, when Spengler's talking about this setting of the sun, which is translated as the decline of the West, of the Abendland. So we get Untergang, undergoing, maybe more literally, undergoing of the evening land, which is supposed to correspond. So it's like you had the sun rising at the beginning, which is the sun of the theoretical attitude. Everything is lit in this sun, and then we start asking questions, and for Hegel, Heraclitus is one of the first to start casting this light, and so this is what we're looking at in the Heraclitus seminar. And that you could ask, is there a position where Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Anaximander, who Aristotle praises so highly, where nothing is yet lit by them. So then you could talk about tribal consciousness or something. And then there's this notion, the first beginning is when all these things start to to fill the eyes of the one who has now come into possession of thought. But then we get this issue that we become aware that it's not only those concepts, but all kinds of concepts, including being, which, like, in a specific sense, we could see that the Hebrew Bible doesn't have the word is, or doesn't have the word being in the sense that Aristotle uses it, ousia, and the rabbis had to coin it, and we know when it happened, and so on. And and in modern Hebrew is different. But in ancient Hebrew, in the Exodus passage, with what the King James translates, I am that I am, but the Tinsdale translates more faithfully, I shall be as I shall be, because the I am concept only comes through Plato and the Septuagint into the biblical understanding. So, I mean, you have to remember, like, the people that made Hebrew thinking Greek were, like, they came, Alexander died in 321, and they did that in Alexandria. So it's like, and in Alexandria you had the most perfect, live scrolls of all Plato and Aristotle and many other of these leaders of these early schools thoughts, and so therefore the ones who translated the Hebrew Bible first into Greek were totally steeped in academic, in the strict sense, sort of like in the academy rather than the Stoa, or rather than the Epicurean school, or rather than the Aristotelian school. The academics who accepted what the academics accepted were the ones that made the Bible part of the Mediterranean, Hellenistic Mediterranean world. So then you could ask this kind of question, like, what are we being asked to do with this so-called leap? And there's different versions. The Walter Benjamin version that I was kind of looking at this morning when I was thinking of the critique of Samuel Moyne, because he has a kind of technological consciousness, like, old age, that means the loss of capacities, and they have a list of capacities, and maybe partially they have to do with this sort of Stanford-Binet tests, which are totally, Binet said, what's your definition of intelligence? My definition is the score that you get when you take the test. There's nothing further. So it's like a machine, and then you could change what it, it's almost like, or put another way, it's like a measuring device, and then you could change what it measures. Depends on how you calibrate it. So is this what's meant by decline, that you're doing worse according to some metrical calculation, or does it, like, decline? So, like, it's true that we could see, like, there must be bodily decline, although I see, like, more frequently things with, like Arnold Schwarzenegger is like 80 years old, 79. I think he just turned 79 today. He looks like he's a lot fitter than, like, most young people, to tell you the truth. So I don't know, but it's probably, let's grant that, though, that there must be physical decline. But I think the simple thing is, like, even if there's lots of ways that one declines when one gets older, that doesn't mean there's simply decline. So I think that's what Moyne takes for granted, because he thinks in a technological way. In fact, there's, like, other ways in which the personality becomes fuller. And in fact, that doesn't even have it to do, like, a decrease in physical strength in that way isn't really the same as a decrease. It's like, if you have Robert De Niro put on a lot of weight to play Jake LaMotta in certain scenes, he's still Robert De Niro. It's still the same level of personality. So it's like actually all those declines that technically we look at, they course. I mean they sit there while there's actually a more, the personality is becoming fuller. In fact, the personality is simply becoming fuller. At a certain age, that stops, and then there's a break. The personality collapses. So like you, I know it's sort of indelicate to sit. I shouldn't say this is sort of invidious, actually, but there is like a good example of that in recent years of the jurist Richard Epstein, because I know he basically sort of took himself off the road. Like, so I'm not going to drive anymore, but in the sense that like he used to do these podcasts with John Yoo, and then he just sort of like said, no, that's it, because I'm not myself anymore, sort of. So I think obviously one could see that there was a decline, and it was a decline in personality, as it wasn't just a decline in essential ways. And that when that happens, then I would say yes, there's one should step down. We haven't seen that yet with Trump. We didn't actually see it with Biden. That was Biden was always sort of dull, and then I mean he was straight-sighted enough to realize to actually say quite a bit before Putin actually invaded that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. Because I think he's like a warlike mentality. But actually, yeah, what happened with Biden was that he was sick right before the debate, and then everybody would nod. But actually, he was about, like, cognitively or whatever, he was actually about the same. And personality was about the same. Although, okay, people don't like the optics that he sort of looks like he's stumbling around or whatever. But what difference does that make? He had a team of people around him. But my point is, like, if you didn't like Biden, you're never going to like him. So what difference does it make that he's old? Maybe it would be worse if he were more energetic. But in any case, I mean, if people that like Trump, they probably still, it's probably Trump is better now than he ever was. I think that must be true for the people that like him. And in fact, he's undergoing sort of like certain changes where, because he's a Hercules type, which I also identify with crooked-minded Kronos, I think that's, actually I'll look that up, but I think that's the 1990, the Fagles translation, the 1990 translation. But it could be said in different ways. Like Kronos is twisted in counsel or something like that. But this Hercules type is known to sort of go insane. So it's like this is probably going to happen to Trump. People are saying, I mean, of course, a lot of people have already said that, and they say he's demented. But if you sort of listen to him speak, I think it's like you could still, he's not that much different than he ever was. So we'll probably see a moment when he actually goes insane, but which is sort of fun and whatever. But I mean, I say that just because I think that's actually important. Like, we should admit that in a certain way there's an energy that morally people don't want to say it, but people enjoy the craziness. And I think like you see like Robert Reich melting down, and he can't take it anymore. I think he doesn't enjoy it, but I think like to a lot of ordinary people, the fact that the existential war is deepening is not totally bad, but the more there's the existential war, the more everyone is the same, I think, in a certain way. Yeah, so there's a complicated question here about how we're to distinguish these two problems, like the and I think this problem of the first beginning from Heidegger's sort of look at what would be a radical leap, first beginning, it sort of has specific content. We know what it was about. We could name names. The radical leap, we're not quite sure what it would mean. But both ways, Heidegger is sort of saying, Husserl thought there was only these two stages. Like before you go learn anything in a schoolroom, what you learn from the family, basically based on sort of, which obviously has to do with sort of like where you are and who your parents are, and whether they're cannibals or anything, Egyptian fellaheen's or whatnot, and the theoretical attitude, which is supposed to, I guess that's another big aspect of it, which was given up in not that long ago in a certain way, which was that it's a question of whether the move from attitude 1 to attitude 2 is totally a building up. In other words, whether it represents genuine progress in every way. So we tend to think, if anything is genuine progress, it would be something like there's pre-literate and then literate cultures, supposedly, and we regard that as genuine progress. And then we think everybody thinks they should teach their children to read. Is everything like that, or did we go wrong in certain spots? And then everybody says, of course, we went wrong in certain spots, but exactly what they are is a matter of opinion. And then we'll have to fight to the death over it, as Schmidt says. And in fact, the political enemy would be your next door neighbor more than it would be some other country which the state could have fought for you, according to Machiavelli. This version, Heidegger says there's a third, there must be something back behind this first and second position. Between the, how's it called? I think it's called, I'm going to say Anstellung. No, is that right? What's the word that Husserl uses for the Einstellung? For the attitude, for the Natureinstellung, I want to say. This Natur and theoretical attitude, or something prior to that. So that's what Heidegger is. So a lot of ways people say, oh, Heidegger's talking about time, and that's what Heidegger's notion of the Sein Frage is about time. No, it's actually not. That's one mode that he tries to use, and it's very dramatic and impressive because we get to this, and all the French theory is sort of influenced by this notion that we have this reversal where, because we're already setting what our projects are, that this is like the that's all these Walter Benjamin images and so on. All this stuff revolves around this notion of Heidegger interpreted as somebody who's putting possibility prior to existence, right? But that's only one approach. Okay, that's only one approach in Heidegger, and I think arguably it's more basic. But then the question is it more cogent? So like when we go through all this stuff, then you get some guy like George Samueli comes in and he says, what's all this gobbledygook? Why are they trying to dress up their nonsense in order to pretend to be saying something? So this is a legitimate question. I think at every point we have to prove that it's cogent, that we're like actually looking into these issues. And sometimes we have proofs because we have this, I think it's a very strong juxtaposition between like where you were just born and grew up without being really conscious, and then at a certain point you had some kind of, you're in a classroom and you were being given some kind of specific direction. We could see that there's something, that this is a cogent point. And we could look at the details, and then that has to do a lot with cultural anthropology and other things that will cast light on it. But there's lots of other issues where, like, is there also this third position beside from the prior to the classroom and after being in the classroom. Is there the possibility even of this third position? As we, how could that be? And then I'd have to show that's cogent and so on, and that's what Heidegger tries to do, this kind of thing. So, yeah, I think I'll just end it by saying that we have a nice, if I can get the file to function again, we have a nice question here, because right at the beginning of this sort of preliminary remarks, Heidegger is distinguishing three different concepts of, I think, Anfang, which they're giving the main translators of the sort of quasi-official translators of GA55 are calling this inceptive. It's Anfang, but it has to do with something to do with the inception means sort of like seizing upon in its etymology, taking to oneself, and then Anfang somehow corresponds to that. So Heidegger used that deliberately, but not just because we're guessing, but because he lays that out in the text. But then he juxtaposed it to this notion of begin or beginning as just a chronological beginning and this Ursprung notion. So I think we already get a lot of sort of cognitive exercise in questioning is possible here in this primary questions at the beginning of this text.